Awesome. We're live.
Woohoo!
We made it.
Made it. Yay.
Love it. Love it. Looking forward to this. Kent, thanks for hopping on with us. First ever Coffee with Coalesce. What an honor to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yep,
Glad
definitely.
to be participating in the launch.
Yep. For those of you who don't know Kent, which I find for you as a thought leader, and I'm so glad to have you here, man.
Yeah, well, happy to be here. I think it's we got a lot of fun things to talk about today for sure.
Definitely.
And I always have for the last decade, I guess, at least prior to Coalesce and all our work in the data space together.
That's right. Past lives of automation, largely
Yes.
focused on what we'll talk about today. Also, just quick introduction, myself, Armon, Petrossian, CEO, Coalesce, co-founder. I've got my better half here, Satish. I'll let you introduce yourself, man.
Hello there, Satish Jayanthi. I'm one of the co-founders as well, and I worked with Armon and Kent for a few years.
Sweet.
More than a few years, yeah.
Yeah, more than a few years.
And he still works with me. Can you believe it?
Yeah. That's
cool. Well, look, for anybody that's tuning in, feel free to leave some comments or questions. Just to kick this off, Kent, I think that, as you were retiring from Snowflake, we caught up and we were still in stealth mode at the time. And I remember connecting with you and letting you know what we were doing at Coalesce. And it was so awesome to see how excited you were. And, I would love to just hear from you firsthand. I'm sure the audience would as well. Like, what was it that attracted you to Coalesce and what we were doing? And, what problems did you see in the space over these past couple of decades that you thought Coalesce was uniquely solving?
Well, I've always been all about automation. I just wrote a post recently. I think I've been into automation in the data space for, close to 30 years, because I started working with the Oracle case tools back in the early 90s when they first came out. So however long ago that was, and got convinced that being able to design something from an architect or analyst perspective, from business perspective, and have it generate the codes. So code generators, huge fan of code generators. As it have been now really for decades. And then, as I got into data warehousing and the data space, looking for tools that did that sort of thing in the data space. And then, of course, we got into the agile world and people wanting to run agile projects. We did agile software development projects and a couple of code generator type tools, automation tools in that space that help people be more agile in software development. And then we get over to the data space and there weren't nearly as many. Right. But the ones that did come out really made a huge difference to people who were able to adopt it. And so seeing what you guys are doing now, now we're into the world of the data cloud, right? And we're no longer on-prem, we're in the cloud, and just massive growth in the amount of data that's out there, and making it really hard for teams to keep up with onboarding new data, transforming it, curating it, and making it available to the business in a timely manner. There's just so much to do. Hand coding it's not scalable. I mean, that's really bottom line is hand coding things is not scalable the way things are today with the cloud. We got this massive opportunity, this ability to scale nearly unlimitedly with platforms like Snowflake.
Yep.
But it doesn't do any good to have that power if you can't get the data and get it where it needs to be. So having something like Coalesce, what you guys are doing, where it's really, it's a no-code, low-code environment, which is, of course, all the rage today. But it still generates code in the background. So it's not a total black box. So you can see what's happening. And it is generating true code natively for the database. In the case of what you guys are doing, Snowflake, right? It's generating native Snowflake code. And as the space is growing and the adoption of Snowflake is just, through the roof, it's going to be a lot easier for people to get moving more rapidly.
Yep.
Because they don't have to learn necessarily the nuances of the coding in Snowflake, the SQL. It is all SQL based, but
Right.
there's some nuances. Every database has its nuances, and Snowflake is no different. Being able to deal with the JSON data and the semi-structured data and the variants in Snowflake, and you guys have that all built in, right?
Yep.
I mean, I had to learn that when I joined Snowflake. I had to learn how to write that SQL, and wasn't too hard, but you still have to write it, right? And you got to write it the correct way. Being able to generate that code, and really basically specify what I want to have happen and have the code get generated for me. Well, that makes me a lot more productive. And so that's why I think it's so exciting, because the world is, there's not enough data engineers to go around to do all the data work that needs to be done. And so we've got to be able to empower, your data analysts and your domain specialists who understand the data to help with these things as well, because it's otherwise you're going to still have the traditional data warehouse bottleneck, which used to be ETL, right? And we don't want to have that in the cloud. And there's no reason we should have that in the cloud anymore. But if we're not careful, we could have that bottleneck just with not having enough data engineers to develop our data pipelines.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a big part of our thesis behind building Coalesce, and a big reason why we're so passionate about this mission. And it's interesting, historically, and even today, you've seen there is recently starting to become this negative stigma with GUIs, for example, because the historical GUI-based tools have lacked the ability to be flexible. And so at times when we're talking to different organizations or different people, I think it's really easy for people to put us in that bucket. But as you discussed earlier, having that flexibility of the code and having a way to package it in a way that gives you that low code experience is what gets you the productivity gains. And that is rare. That just has not been done. It's either so far on one side of the spectrum where, a vendor has a low code, no code environment that's really rigid anytime you need to get out of those parameters, or you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum and you're purely code first, code centric, everything programmatic. We're going to code everything, which is just so hard to scale and insanely inefficient. And so we really wanted to give our users, empower our users to have the best of both worlds. Something that we're all very excited about, and something that keeps coming up. As we came out of stealth and talked to more and more organizations and people, they're like, "Oh, it's a GUI. It can't possibly have the flexibility we need." But Kent, as you know, we've been doing this for quite some time in the largest data warehouses and been able to solve those problems before. So it was such an important aspect. Any thoughts on the whole GUI code piece, that stigma?
Yeah, I mean, it's there have been plenty of tools in the past that were really pretty much black box, right? And you really couldn't tell what it was. And you got to stay very strictly within the boundaries of the product. And what the product was designed to do. And there's no way to, I'll say, color outside the lines. You guys have solved that with your templates, right? That you have the ability, if there's specific standards, some sort of specific type of object or business rules that you want to apply, but you want to apply them consistently, you're giving people the opportunity with the templates to really, and what do you call those, Satish? They're user-defined nodes.
There you go. User-defined nodes. Yeah.
User-defined nodes. Yeah. So when you hear that, people don't freak out. They didn't really invent anything new. It's a template. It's a template that allows you to define something. And to me, that's great, because I'm also, while I'm a big fan of code generation, I'm also a massive fan of standards. And you've got to have governance. You've got to have standards. And coding standards are part of it, and standard approaches to things are part of that, and being able to encode that in a user-defined node that's specific to your company. So yeah, you still need a data engineer, and that's the person who's going to help you figure out how should we code this? What's the best way to code this thing that's not in line with some of the standard stuff that you already have in the product? How do we want to do it as an organization to be able to define that? And then it's okay, everybody, if you're going to do X, use this node, and it's going to generate the code exactly the way you want to see it done.
Yeah. With your background too, Ken, one of the roles Satish and I have always felt has been neglected recently is the data architect, that persona, where we see so much attention being drawn to the data engineer or the data analyst, but in reality, if we want to accomplish something at scale for a large enterprise, whether it's a Fortune 500 or just a very complex environment, the data architect's really the one who's going to be driving those architectural decisions and should be making those standards so that people who are less experienced with data can then leverage what they build. So when we have specific nodes, like you said, we want to empower them to be as effective or almost as effective as a data architect, but allow that to scale throughout the organization, especially for, you talk about data mesh quite a bit recently. And it's so important that you provide those users, those citizen data engineers or department specific users, a tool that gives them the flexibility, but also the ease of use, while also allowing the architects to kind of drive the guardrails of the organization. And I don't see how it's possible any other way, to be honest.
Yeah, and more organizations, because of the pressure and the speed at which they are required to build these analytics, I believe they're skipping this architecture step, or they're not just focusing enough on that because they think by just going and implementing, they're getting the speed. Actually, the effect is the opposite.
And it's the power that we've gotten in the cloud to a certain extent has allowed people to be sloppy again. I mean, and this happens like every wave we go through in IT. This happens, back when the big data era started, they said basically we don't need to do data modeling anymore. We're going to use schema on read. And little did anybody realize that schema on read meant you had a model, right? You just were waiting to look at the model a little late. So yeah, let's not, throw out. I mean, we the same best practices come up for the last 30 years. It's like a little bit of planning. Even if you're trying to do agile, there's a sprint zero. Sprint zero is where you figure out your standards and you figure out your templates. And if you do that right, then once you get going and you get a team cadence going, then you can be very, very productive and very efficient. And the things that you build are going to work. But there has to be a vision, right? And that's where the architects come in. It's like, what's our long-term vision? And even if it's not long-term, but some kind of a vision. Where are we trying to go here? And what kind of standards should we be applying so that not only are we delivering, it's great to deliver things quickly, but they have to be sustainable.
Yep.
You don't want to deliver a bunch of stuff that you then have to. The big deal in Agile was refactoring. Oh, we'll just refactor. It's like, yeah, but you can't refactor everything. And if you have no planning, you end up refactoring everything. And that burns a lot of cycles as well. And so, okay, maybe you delivered stuff quickly, but if you have to then spend multiple sprints and cycles refactoring it because you didn't think it all the way through, well, that's a problem too. Now, again, the advantage of things like Snowflake and even Coalesce, anything that's generating code, it's a lot faster to do that and do the refactoring. But let's put a little thought into this. Data models, again, you still need a data model, at least a conceptual data model, so you understand the space. And then you need a high-level data architecture of, how are we going to lay this out? Are we going to use a data lake and a data warehouse? Are we going to do data vault? Are we going to do Kimball dimensional modeling? Are we going to do some sort of a hybrid that works for what we're trying to do? But those questions have to be answered early on by the leads before you unleash the tools. One of my buddies years ago, back in the Oracle designer days, said, a fool with a good tool is still a fool. A bad architect with a good tool is still a bad architect. The tool just enables you to, well, as we now say in Agile, fail faster, right? You can implement a really bad architecture really quickly.
Right.
And, hopefully you catch that and then you iterate. But really we'd like to avoid all of that. We want to avoid the failures. We want to build stuff that's successful, flexible, extensible, and sustainable, right? Because we're moving so fast. We really don't have time to refactor.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. I mean, there's been so many different companies we've spoken to who like you had said, Snowflake gave them access to this incredibly powerful platform, and they didn't do planning. They're a small company and they hit hypergrowth. And as they were doing things with data, trying to build their data warehouse, didn't have a proper architecture or model. 2 years later, it's gone completely out of control and they have to redesign the entire thing. And so, I would compare it to building a house without a blueprint. I mean, you're basically going out without any designs and you're just trying to build a house. And the bigger that house is, the harder that is. Small use cases, for sure. You can get away with it for some time, but as things grow, and you should always plan to inevitably grow and build for the future, things can get out of hand really quickly.
Yeah, well, there's the old statement: failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah.
Right. And yep. I tell people, when people say, "Oh, well, we just got a little company, we only have one source, we're just going to throw it in and we're going to put reports on it." And my question is, do you not plan to grow as a company?
Yeah.
Because if you're not planning to grow as a company and you build your architecture as though you will never grow as a company, you are planning to fail as a company.
Exactly.
Right? If you don't see a vision or a future for your company, you're being very short-sighted, and odds are your competitors won't be.
Right.
And they're planning for growth. You need to plan for growth, and you need to plan for success. Yep. That's what we're really talking about, is plan for success. But you got to understand, what does success look like? More customers, more data, more sources in the case, because we're talking about data architecture and analytics. We've got to build things in such a way that allows us to scale and allows us to grow in hypergrowth mode.
Yeah. Definitely, or even just moderate growth. These things come up as time continues. So we've seen it too many times, and I think Kent. By the way, I see some comments here. Damien O'Farrell, yes, don't ignore the data architecture. Totally agree with you, Joe. Hey man, how you doing? Thanks for hopping on. I think, well, like with that in mind, you mentioned Snowflake really was this huge disruption in such a positive way for giving people access to such a powerful platform. And we've seen automation impact so many sectors of analytics. I think that the transformations piece is lagging, whereas, for example, the extraction and load has been largely focused on for so long with things like Fivetran and HVR, which have made it so easy to ingest data. And now we're starting to see this new frontier of focus on transformation specifically, which is something we're so excited about addressing in a unique way with what we're doing at Coalesce. So, I think the automation will get there the same way Snowflake automated database tuning and made it so easy to get spun up with that platform, or how Fivetran made it point and click to just ingest data so simply. We want to apply that same philosophy to transformations.
Yeah, really. And while you're talking about that, Armon, why don't you said there's probably a bunch of new folks watching that aren't completely familiar with Coalesce. Why don't you give us a little readout on your vision for Coalesce, the company, as you're talking about all these things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it goes back quite some time. Satish and I, we met probably 7 years ago, and in our past lives, we were largely focused on dealing with the world's largest, most complex enterprise data warehouses. On on-premise platforms before Snowflake was a thing. Obviously, worked very closely with Snowflake, some of those largest data warehouse use cases as well. And we saw similar problems over and over again that were largely unaddressed. And as the market continued, like we were saying earlier, we saw automation impact every sector. And there's been great disruptions, on the business intelligence side with things like Tableau, ThoughtSpot. On the ingestion side with things like Fivetran, obviously Snowflake as a platform. And we want to take that same philosophy and apply it to what we see is the largest bottleneck in analytics today, which is actually taking that data in its raw format and getting it to the point where it's consumable by the business with proper governance, proper documentation and lineage as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. Now, we talk a lot about our product architecture, some of the design decisions that we made from day one with that experience and all the shortcomings we saw in the marketplace. We talk a lot about having a column-aware architecture and really being the only tool that was built from the ground up that leverages column metadata the way that we do. And that opens up so many doors. I mean, it allows us to build an incredibly intuitive GUI. It allows us to automate code without having to write those templates if you don't want to. It allows us to provide column level lineage and enhance that lineage. It also allows us to help design and build a data warehouse or build a data project incredibly efficiently and quickly and largely at scale. Without that column metadata, without some of these other aspects of our design decisions that we made, it's really difficult to support an enterprise use case. And the bigger it gets, the harder it can be. And so really we want to be laser focused on making that portion of the stack that people are spending the most amount of time with, as efficient as possible and supportable for that scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to add a few things to that, we heard the saying that, IT wants to build things right, business wants it now. That has been there forever. And I personally experienced that. I'm one of those IT guys where I wanted to do things right. But to do things right takes time. Tool is definitely one aspect of the whole thing, but it's not the entire thing. There's a lot of other factors that play into the speed. However, if you don't have the right tool that brings business and the IT together, then that's not a starter. And that's what I experienced for a long, long time. And with Coalesce, our vision is to change that. We have seen how the market shifted from one end to the other, where we had purely IT tools, like ETL tools. Only IT people can work with them. Only IT can solve or build those pipelines. And then, that was taking really, really long time to build data warehouses. And then there's a new type of products that came in that skipped the entire IT and went directly to the business and said, hey, you guys can build your own thing. Go ahead and, this is the tool. You don't need IT to do this stuff. And I think that's the same problem. You're going to the other extreme, which is also not a good thing for organizations. Now, with Coalesce, what we're saying is we want, whether you're an architect, whether you're an engineer, whether you're an analyst, whether you're a power business user, you should be able to use, it's a one single platform where all of that metadata is centralized, so you can keep track of things. You can govern as an IT or a central governance organization. And also as an IT architect, you can set those guardrails. You can build those patterns. You can deal with that low level code that you only can because there's no other experts in the organization. And then you kind of unleash all of that and have everybody else also contribute to that process. And I think that's how you get to the speed and the final goal of having a very strong data foundation.
Yeah, like democratizing data, right? We've been talking about that for so long, haven't we? And it's just been a pipe dream. And I think that largely there needs to be a tool that helps bridge the gap between those roles and those skill sets, especially throughout a legacy enterprise. Some of these insurance companies, retail companies that have been around for hundreds of years don't have the same type of resources that a high growth startup might have. And so being able to accompany them and their traditional skill sets in a unique way, and then also support every other use case that the platform can in an efficient manner is so important. And so that's really what we saw the gap was. It's a big reason why we decided to pursue Coalesce and start this company a couple years back while we were in stealth. And I think that the road is just beginning. I mean, there's so many spaces, there's so many sectors of analytics that obviously have problems, but we would say that this is the largest one that has been unmet so far. This is the one that has been the biggest pain point for the longest amount of time and hasn't really been addressed in a way that is scalable and supportable. And so that's why we chose this section along with our backgrounds.
Yeah. And I think that it's the right time, right? We're reinventing everything for the cloud, and nobody has really reinvented this piece of it other than at a coding level, right? We talk about data engineering and data pipelines and a lot of coding. I mean, it scared me a bunch of years back when I started seeing people go away from, GUI tools like Oracle Designer and things like that and moving more into Python. Yep. And so we've gone, we took that other turn of, okay, we went back to low level coding, and it's like, okay, I'm out. It's like, how many more languages do I want to learn in my career to be effective at what I do. I'm good with SQL. I'm good with SQL, right? But why do we have to go back to learning what was, it's MapReduce? Yeah, that was the one that really scared me. It's like, we got to do MapReduce to pull data out and munge it so that we're doing it. And then, of course, there's Spark and people doing a lot of things in Spark as well for transformations. And again, as we're growing and things are, speeding up even more, it's like there's just not enough time for people to develop that expertise. But as Satish said, you can have your expert coder, architect, and folks, building in repeatable standards into a platform, into Coalesce. Then it's a lot easier to distribute it. So we talked in the past a lot about data mesh, and so this idea of empowering these domain data teams. Well, one of the concepts around there is having some sort of a center of excellence. Again, can you expect every domain team to have expert data engineers? Probably not at a very large scale, really large organizations. That's just not going to work. But if you can have some central experts who can define the standards and build templates that can be reused and implemented via Coalesce, folks that are analysts and are more business centric, that lines up really well, I think, with the whole data mesh concept of having the people who work with the data on a daily basis, who understand the data, know the data, make them responsible for the data quality and for moving it into a data product, as they call it in the data mesh space. But that's really, it's a data mart. We're building it, but we want it all to be integrated. We want it to be standardized. We want to have governance. And in my mind, the only way to do that is through automation.
Yep.
And that's really kind of the sweet spot that you guys are hitting. Like I said, I think it makes sense to reinvent that now for the cloud. And I think you guys have kind of followed the Snowflake model, is built in the cloud for the cloud, right?
Correct. Definitely.
And that's the way I think Snowflake really kind of proved that is really the only way to reinvent a space. Is you have to start over, which is what Snowflake did, right? They started over, 0 lines of code and wrote a new product and a new architecture and a new approach to dealing with data in the cloud that's, been hugely successful and is now the data cloud. And you guys are doing the same thing with the data pipeline, ETL, ELT space, but it really is, you got to think about things differently. You got to really forget about some of the ways we've done things in the past and let go of that and say, okay, we're going to take a new approach here.
Definitely. I mean, just being able to start from scratch was so refreshing for us to, take all the lessons we learned, all the drawbacks that we saw, shortcomings of other technologies, and be able to just build from the ground up, make the right design decisions and right architectural decisions, similar to how Snowflake did with the whole separate, compute from storage. These, what may seem like simple concepts, have such compounding value as you grow as a business and grow as a product. And it all starts at the very, very early stages of building a product, the very, very early architectural decisions. And that's something I think we've only continued to learn the power of as we go down this journey with Coalesce.
Yeah, there's a great comment here from Tim that I got to say, that he says he's the same vintage as I am. I love that, Tim. That's a great way to put it. Starting with DW, ETL solutions using Unix and PL SQL code before we had any GUI tools. Then we moved to visual tools like Informatica and Data Stage. I have no idea why people want to go back to delivery via code.
Yep.
I'm with you 100%. That's one of the reasons I'm here today, Tim. I could not have put it better. The question from Austin, and this is, I think, a good one for you, Satish, to dive in a little bit more about what you mean by column aware, because that's one of the things you talk about with Coalesce that is definitely different than what you hear from other product vendors.
Or you could show people, Satish, as well.
Well, yeah, we could do that too.
Yeah, definitely.
You ready?
Yeah, sure. Just to kind of add a little bit of color to that. When we say column aware, basically what we're saying is we understand how every column in the repository is connected to the other columns. And when you're dealing with one column and you're changing something, how does that impact your pipeline? And we have used that column awareness from the ground up to build every part of our product. So maybe, it's right time to show that. So
just so everybody knows, this wasn't my idea either. I was getting dinner with Kent. We were meeting up, we're having some drinks. I said, hey, we should do a live stream. I think it'd be awesome. A lot of people love you. You're pretty popular, if you didn't know. I said, we can just talk conceptually about some things, have some fun, take some questions. And Kent goes, no, what? You guys just came out of stealth. Nobody's seen your product yet. You got to at least show it a little bit. And so I said, okay, fine. I guess we'll plan to do that too. And it ties in nicely to this whole column aware concept, the metadata pieces, the lineage, and so easy to show it off. So
yeah, because talk is cheap, as they say.
Yes.
And in this case, it's free. So let's show them what you got.
Absolutely.
Right. Cool. 1 second.
We can see your screen, which is good. And hopefully this isn't laggy. I saw Johan was saying that he was having a little bit of latency issues, but it looks like everybody else is good. So,
all right, cool. So here's Coalesce is a software as a service product. So you just log in with an account.
No infrastructure needed. It was refreshing for us as well. I see some questions as well.
Glenn, Dr. Glenn.
Doesn't seem to be very retired.
yeah, that's what my wife was saying recently too.
You can't contain him.
I may be retired, but I'm never tired.
There you go.
There you go. So after you log in and you see this is the screen, you see 2 tabs at the top. There's the build and there's the deploy. Basically, as a data engineer, you're spending most of your time building what we call the graph. You're also familiar with the term DAG. One prerequisite here is, this is purely a transformation tool. So we expect all the tables and the raw data sitting in Snowflake already. So you may have ingested using some manual coding or some other tools like Fivetran. But once the data is in Snowflake and you have access to those, all you do here is to add those to this graph. These are all the database and schemas that I have access to. I can kind of look at by expanding each one and seeing what tables are there. I can sample the data before bringing it into my graph, or I can just select everything here. I can add these. These are nodes, since this is a graph, and there's different types of nodes that you can kind of add to the graph. We call these as source nodes, since they represent the source tables. If I click on any one of these, I can look at the columns. I can look at the structure of that particular table. I can look at the data types. You can even sample the data from here just to see how it looks. Before I start anything, before I do anything, I can just kind of get a feel for what the data looks like. Now there's column, customer name, address, and other information here. Now, if I want to start building my pipeline, you can either start from the existing nodes, which is a more typical way to do it, or you can also add like an unrelated node to this graph. But let's say if I want to build something based on the customer node, I can just right-click in here and say Add Node, and I have a whole bunch of node types that are available in my repository. However, this is not the complete list, but you can see like a node profiler is essentially a data profiler. You have a deduplicator. You have things like data vault nodes. You have hubs.
You ever heard of that, Kent? Data vault?
Yeah, I've come across that somewhere.
Something you must have heard it somewhere.
Somewhere over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I see a couple questions here too. Can it source data from Snowflake stage? Yeah, as long as data is landed in Snowflake, good to go. Mauricio, how much data management automation do you see in the next 5 years? I mean, I've got my personal answer. Anything that is repetitive should be automated, and we should be allowing data people to focus on the hard stuff, which is working with the business and driving insight out of that data. Anyways, I think you'll see really quickly here as Satish goes into building a type 2 dimension, how easy that is and how quick it can be. Along with Data Vault, support pretty much anything Snowflake can do, Coalesce is capable of. It gives you that full flexibility within the platform. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not a complete list of all the node types. And one important factor here is that you can actually create your own node type. A node type has certain configuration, certain behavior, certain UI, which you can build programmatically, and all of that. So in this case, you're seeing these data vault nodes, which are all user-defined nodes that we talked about in the beginning of this discussion. So for example, I can create a stage node out of this. And again, it has its own properties like naming convention and the color and associated with it. But essentially, it just copied all that metadata and created this new node type, stage customer. And you can see the columns, you can see the data types. I can add transformations here to this to change the data. There's also a configuration that is associated with this particular node type. So in this case, it's a stage node. So it has configuration, for example, like truncate before. Because these are staging tables, you basically have by default, you can, whenever you run these, refresh these, they always truncate, like flush and fill those.
But that's updatable. If somebody decided they didn't want to do that, that's just a switch, right?
Exactly. That's a switch here. You can go behind the scenes and actually make the default as, turn it off rather than on. So you can do all of those things. Every part of this is configurable. You can change this. And also there's create and run buttons. Basically, create is our DDL. When I push that create button, this table gets created on Snowflake. And when I do run, it takes everything into account here, whatever options that you have selected, whatever transformations that you have put here. It'll take all of that and generate template-based code behind the scenes to process that node, or populate that table in this case.
Was kind of an important thing as well that we came to find as we came out of stealth. The importance of abstracting that DDL and DML gives you so much more flexibility. For example, different use cases, incremental use cases, being able to customize that and having that abstraction from the ground up was so key instead of something that's black boxed or an outside-in approach for customizing that. And, we can touch on that in a second here, but I remember that question coming up to us a couple of times when we just came out of stealth, like why the create and run instead of just one button? And it really helps give you that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. In these transformations, you can put in, anything that's valid on Snowflake. In this case, for example, I can just change that, case of these columns, and if I create the table, I can see the create statement. Of course, nothing is black box here. Everything is, exactly what's happening. In this case, we've submitted a create statement, and if I fetch the data from this, it's an empty table. There's nothing in it yet. But once you run it, it's going to take what you put here and generate that SQL statement. Now it populated that and also changed that to uppercase. Now this transformation can be as complex as it needs to be, but anything that's valid on Snowflake, you can use it here. Now,
and of course, now that this is run, if you were over on your Snowflake GUI, you could actually go in and see what happened behind the scenes, what warehouse was used, and how long it took, and how many micro partitions it affected, all of that sort of thing, right?
Absolutely. And you can also control where this gets created, on which databases and which schema you want this to be created by default.
Yeah, it's all parameterized, right?
It's all parameterized. Everything is configurable. And I mean, I can add columns. I can change the names of columns. I can, like, for example, I can duplicate this column. Let's duplicate this. I can say, hey, let's call this something like a customer rating column, where you're labeling the customers, based on their account balance. So you can say that, and you can see the autocomplete that will kind of help you, while you're typing these. And you can say whatever transform that makes sense here. And this is all pure SQL. There's nothing new to learn here.
Yep.
You can change the data types, of course, and you can do this in bulk as well, by the way. And at this point, I have to create the table since I've added a new column, and then I can run it, and I should see my new column that I just added. That's the calculation that we added. Now, you can filter the data, you can join multiple tables, but you can also create a series of these stage tables to break down some complex logic. Well, it's all SQL again, as I said. But once you get to the point where your data is prepared, and now you say, hey, I want to create a dimension. I want to create that end user table. It doesn't have to be a dimension. It could be a flat table. But if you have a methodology that you're following, like Kimball's, and you want to create that dimension, again, the pattern is the same. You right click and you click that dimension button. You don't really need to know a lot about how this dimension is like working, and you don't have to build all of this. This is all there, according to the standards. It needs a surrogate key. So there is a surrogate key here. There is some system fields. And then
so the node, to be clear, your node template automatically added these metadata columns.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, that's correct. So if you're using a different type of node, you might see different metadata columns depending on what it is
right.
for. So in this case, also the configuration is specific to this type of node. When you saw the stage customer stage type of nodes, we had an option where we said truncate option was there, and it was turned on. Since this is a dimension table, you don't want to truncate data. This is a persistent table. So instead, we have other types of configuration options here. For example, the business key is required now because this is a dimension. So I can choose the business key. I can choose multiple columns, of course, if it's a composite key. Optionally, I can also choose things like, hey, I want to track changes to address and phone number. So these are change tracking columns.
Yeah. So this is something, when I saw this demo, these guys will remember. It's like, this blew me away, because what you have done is you have now allowed somebody to declaratively define a type 2 slowly changing dimension without them even knowing they're defining a type 2 slowly changing dimension, right? So that you've got an industry best practice built into this that doesn't require the user to actually even know that concept.
Yep,
Exactly. Yeah, that was the goal. And those configurations on the right-hand side, those columns, these are columns, and the configurations were created, and they come from that column awareness. They come from that column metadata. That's why we're able to present it and display it in that way that's so intuitive. It's from that whole column aware concept. And our lovely guys in EMEA, they've made a funny node where Mark has a dimension node, and all you can do is choose a business key. There's nothing else. And it's for what he says, Frederick, his counterpart on the team, who I think Kent. And so all the user can do is choose the business key in the dimension node, and that's it. There's nothing else. You're not going to mess this one up for sure. You just got to choose the right key, making it as easy as possible. Obviously, here with the type 2 dimension, we can see how quickly you can build that. And as Satish goes through creating and running it, we'll get to see the code that it generates for you as a user. And
so the same thing was true as like if you picked a hub or a link or a satellite type node, it's going to put in the standard data vault metadata columns and ask you to pick a business key. Exactly. And all that's already is built in. One of the questions is Coalesce data vault aware? Yeah, Coalesce is data vault aware because the founders are data vault aware.
Yeah, and Coalesce is aware of everything. Anything Snowflake is capable of, Coalesce is aware of. So, for example, we can show, in a quick one, like streams and tasks functionality in Snowflake is such a key feature that we love. And when we shipped Coalesce out of the box, we didn't have a node for streams and tasks. One of our customers, unbeknownst to us, just built one and showed it to us. And within seconds, you can build an entire CDC layer from your source nodes, your source tables, and support streams and tasks in seconds, which I think is so cool. So data vault aware, stream aware, whatever you want to do in Snowflake, we're aware of that.
So, so we have this create table generated, again, the statement. Once I hit that create button and then I run it, it generates the code again, the template, you can control the flavor of the code. But right now, out of the box, there is a template based on best practices. And that is what we're running here. It loaded the data, it added the surrogate key, it did all the system column calculations for the start dates and end dates. And then if you look at the actual SQL, here it is. This is the merge statement. In this case, it's a SQL Snowflake specific merge statement. Use the business key to figure out what is changed, and also included the logic for those change tracking columns. But this is a SQL statement that you or somebody has to write manually in order to implement all of the logic that we implemented.
Yeah, and that is that's part of the power of this, and the power of the automation and code generation is, it took you less than a minute to define this and push a button, and you've got hundreds of lines of code that work out of the box. And like you said, if somebody had to write that manually in even in some sort of a UI, you could get typos, they could miss a column, they could misdefine something, alias something incorrectly, and here it's just boom, it's there, and it runs, right? And it's just it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Yep. I see Siraj here says, we've made data engineers' job boring. Yeah, I think the fun stuff really is actually driving insight out of the data. So we want to focus on that more than anything. Being able to get this stuff done quickly and engage is the most important piece. I see Lauren, your comment as well. Appreciate that. Frederick, where can I report my CEO making fun of me? We don't have an HR department yet. Sorry, man. Still working on that. We're an early stage company. Man.
Yeah.
So, Satish, I think in Kent, one thing that always comes up that I think stares companies right in the face is lineage. And when we talk about column awareness, the column lineage has become such a big problem for organizations that have gone through this hand coding type experience where it's so hard to understand how things are mapped together. And a big reason why that column aware piece is so key to Coalesce, and something that we saw was a huge problem. And, a lot of times organizations or businesses think about column lineage after it's too late. And so then they have to go find something that parses all the SQL or parses all this custom code and tries its best to visualize those connections, which we see as an outside-in approach, whereas we wanted to architect Coalesce from the ground up to provide you with that column lineage and then enhance it in a way that we've never seen really be done before. So I know Satish is plugging away here as I'm speaking, but
yeah. So speaking of column lineage, what you're looking at here is the node lineage. Now, if I click on any of these nodes, all the dependencies get highlighted. So it's very easy to see that. In this case, it's a small pipeline because it's a demo, but we are very, very aware of how these graphs can get very big in real world. I mean, this could be 30, 40 nodes where your joins, you have all sorts of transformation rules and things like that. But we want to be able to see this at a column level. Or let's say, you have this, put it in production and everything is fine. You're sharing the data with finance and marketing in different views. And one view has a subset of the columns, whereas the marketing view has every column, let's say. A few months go by, everybody's using it, and somebody from finance is saying, hey, there's new columns coming in the customer, and I want to see that. Now imagine if this was a 30, 40 nodes, the first thing that you want to know is, what is the impact of that change?
Yeah,
I want to learn that. That's the first step. And once you understand it, then you're now tasked with, how do I make that change? You may have to go into every node, alter or drop and recreate the tables, change the rules, and kind of add that column and adjust the code. So let's simulate that there is a new column coming in for now, and let's call that new column. And let's give it a name. I'll just give it a number. So my first step is, again, as I said, I want to understand the impact of this. So what I can do here is right click and say view column lineage. And this is possible. Again, this column lineage diagram is possible because of the column awareness, that architecture that's built into the tool. As you can see, these lines going from one column to the other and showing you how these columns are connected. So for example, if you look at address, that is used in both finance view and the marketing view. If I look at something like this, marketing segment, that's only shared with marketing. So immediately I kind of understand what's happening here. And also these transformation icons that you see, when I hover over on those, you can actually see the rules that we put in place. So that was the rule that we added before. And I can even hover over on other nodes and understand, those rules. And once I'm comfortable with, okay, here is the landscape, here's what I'm touching, here's what the nodes that I will be able to, I'm about to change, I can go into this column and say, propagate this column forward. And once I do that, I can choose which nodes, will be affected by this change. So I can say, hey, propagate this to customer first, and then to finance, but don't add it to marketing. We're still previewing this. So I'm going to continue to preview and say, hey, this is how it's going to look once everything is connected. And at this point, I can go and confirm this. And
it's going to tell you always gloss over this, but it's going to tell you to check into Git. And I know a lot of people out there love the whole Git concept, software engineering, best practices applied to analytics. And, it's something we saw as table stakes as something we should support, giving people the ability to check in and, perform those types of functions. So in a usual world, you'd probably want to check that into Git, but obviously it's just a demo. So
yeah, and we have Git integration built into this. So you can just, bring up the Git and check this graph state wherever you want. And that's how you actually deploy as well.
Yeah, and so you just answered Terry's question. How is the generated code stored and versioned?
Yeah,
it's using Git, but you've got to check it in.
Yeah,
right.
You
still got to follow good practices for DevOps.
Yep. But yeah, just like that, right? You get those columns propagated upstream or deleted downstream, however you want to do it. Obviously, at a scale of hundreds of nodes, thousands of objects in a database, something that is super powerful. And I think, like I was saying earlier, the column lineage piece is always something that stares companies right in the face. And usually they try to get a tool afterwards to try to go and parse that code and display it, usually not perfectly, but to be able to do it from the ground up and then also enhance it is something that was so unique to the design decisions that I felt like we made in the early days.
Yeah. Hopefully this kind of gave some information around the column awareness that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. You got Jeff just asked, what about reverse engineering? What can Coalesce reverse engineer?
So right now we can ingest an existing kind of, if it's in a certain YAML format, we can probably take that and get that into the graph. But that is a format that somebody has to kind of build before we can reverse engineer. So it's like a specification that they need to meet in order for us to reverse engineer.
So can you reverse engineer existing schema out of Snowflake?
Not quite the way that probably they're expecting. Again, as I said, there's an intermediate step of they can provide something within in a YAML structure, and then we can consume that. But today we cannot just go to an existing set of tables that are in Snowflake and kind of just reverse engineer exactly the way they are. Like if they're dimension tables, and there are ways to do it, it's not straightforward right now.
Yeah. See, Michael Goodman, are you storing the project metadata in the customer Snowflake account? Perhaps we should. What do you think, Satish? I think be a little bit of time, but we'll see.
Yeah. So what was the question?
Where is it today? So yeah, somebody did ask earlier, is there a repository? Where is the metadata being stored today?
Oh, yeah. So our metadata is we host in Google Cloud, and our metadata repository is Google Firebase. So that's where we store.
But to be clear, you do not have to have a Google account to use Coalesce. If you be running Snowflake on Azure, Snowflake on AWS, it doesn't matter because Coalesce is a SaaS.
Exactly.
And it's hosted.
Yep, exactly. You don't ever need to interact with that or host it yourself.
Correct.
Get up and running super quickly. I know we got a few
We got
minutes.
a couple of questions about data modeling. So what's your take on that? On, should people still have a data modeling tool?
I think data modeling is incredibly important. People should always be focused on that, especially at a larger scale enterprise or business. Anybody trying to do something at a complex scale or a large scale should be thinking about data modeling, however they want to go about that. And Coalesce would support those decisions, whatever you may be using, however you may be going about building out that logical design prior to actually doing and performing the physical build here in Coalesce.
Yes, you don't consider Coalesce a modeling tool.
I think the term modeling has got a interesting.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It's not a data modeling tool.
Yeah. I don't know. It depends who you ask what a data model is nowadays. So
True.
Go ahead. Armon.
I was going to say the traditional data modeling, like that term, is a just separate technology. I mean, right? I mean, this is still kind of complementary to that. What would you say, Satish?
Absolutely. So my take, same question was asked yesterday, and my take was I take a more like a pragmatic approach than a purist approach for modeling, because I've seen people spend years on models that were never kind of final models because you just don't have the perfect model. But again, it's the same problem. They went all the way to the other side or the other extreme and said, we don't need modeling at all. There's no data modeling. We just like do whatever. That's not going to work.
It's not going to scale.
It's not going to scale. You got to have the right balance. The data modeling is still relevant, and it's important for you to have a plan. As Kent pointed out, you got to have a plan.
Need a blueprint if you're building a house.
Yeah,
especially if it's a big one.
Build a house without a blueprint. Yeah.
Cool. Kent, any other thoughts? I know we only got a couple minutes left.
Boy, yeah, and there's like been a ton of questions and comments coming in here throughout the whole thing. So it's great to see everybody out there. Will, Sunny, all you guys. One thing that I do want to point out to everybody is Coalesce will be at Snowflake Summit. Yeah, I will be there as well. So those of you who I see a few folks in the chat that I am presuming are going to be there. If some of you who weren't thinking about it, you should definitely think about it. You can get up close and personal with Armon and Satish and learn more about the product. There'll be a lot of fun stuff going on there in Vegas at Snowflake Summit. So if you haven't got your ticket yet, please go do that because we will be there.
Definitely.
No, I think this is great. This was a good preview. I mean, there's so much more. Yeah, I assume you guys are going to do some webinars in the coming months, and so show some of the more complex things. Dale was asking about joins, and how do we do joins in here? How does that work for building out your downstream nodes? I mean, obviously, I think it would be great. We do a demo of building out a data vault and the code that's generated there. There's just so much that we could do.
Absolutely, we should save that for the next session. Kent, do a streams and tasks data vault, just like the document that you had written up. I will say somebody also asked about if we're supporting other platforms. When we're supporting other platforms, I think Satish and I got a pretty strong stance here. We are all in on Snowflake. Big reason why is because that audience philosophically has always wanted the best of breed approach for technology in the stack. And so we want to be the best of breed transformation tool. And so Snowflake made so much sense to partner up with, especially with great people like Ken, so many friends there. So that's where we're at today. Big fans, and yes, we'll be at Snowflake Summit. Drop by the booth. Kent will be there. Satish and I will be there, along with the rest of our team. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.